Hello there again, my friends. Once again, welcome back to Carpo's channel. Today I'd like to talk about people. People fascinate me. In fact, over the last several years on YouTube, even though I've had several different interesting subjects that I've been fascinated with, people are the one subject that I continuously am fascinated by. Psychology. I'm always reading Psychology Today articles and trying to get a better grasp on why we think the way we do. For my own sanity and my own betterment, perhaps, but also to understand other people. And it's interesting because I've been able to see my own psychology in the past. As I've mentioned this before, there was a period of my life where I was very into conspiracy theories. I wasn't super obsessed about them, but I read everything. I mean, this was around the same time as I got into, UFOs, aliens, everything else, back in the late 90s. And for about a decade, I pretty much researched everything I could, and the internet opened up a whole new Pandora's box. But it also opened something else up. That if you're not careful, the, quote, research you do ends up making you look like an idiot. So a lot of the things that I once believed, I had to kind of retract and step back from. And the reason I bring up conspiracies and conspiracy theories is because many are true. I mean, there have been plenty of conspiracies through the years. But the thing I've noticed over the past few years is that they have changed from being conspiracies about the elite, the wealthy, the rich, the greedy, to libtards and Democrats. There has been this complete shift of blame away from, the specific people down to an entire group. Now, this would be what you call the radical left. And I was kind of cracking a joke about this the other day because I say, I grew up in the 80s, man. Being radical was a good thing. But really, when you look back at history, if you really understand the term of why people have protested, fought back, and become radicals, is because of usually governmental tyranny. And today, tyranny is often disguised as being a strong government. It's something that's very difficult to separate for a lot of people, but I see right through it, and I see what's going on. Now, this isn't just the current administration. This goes back with the strongman techniques, back to Nixon starting the drug war, and, increasing prisons and throwing more people in jail, or into the 80s with Reagan, and when cocaine became an issue, and all of a sudden, less fortunate communities were screwed over, but also the average person was screwed over. Let's just say that the one thing that really inspired me to make this video was, I read sometimes, I like listening to a podcast by Brett Weinstein and Heather Hayes. They're married, I believe they're married, but they have their own still last names. Anyhow, they're both biologists. Brett Weinstein is actually a guy who was harassed by the extreme left because he refused to not teach his class during a day where they wanted only blacks there. And it was at Evergreen College. I won't go into the details. But let me just say that he's far from being a liberal, but he's a liberal. And the thing is, he's very open-minded. But what he said the other day was, he carefully chose his words, and I probably should have written it down, but he said something to the effect of, he said, I think of myself as a liberal, and I want, the point of being a liberal is to change the system enough to help the people, in other words, to suit the people. He said, we want to change, enough change, so we can all live as conservatives. And I don't know if everyone quite grasps what a conservative is, but it's quite simple, I mean, there are many different opinions. People call themselves conservatives or Democrats or liberals or whatever. Being conservative basically means conserving, right? Conserving basically means you like to keep things the way they are. And generally, conservatives like to keep the status quo. Liberals like to stir shit up and change things. And the question is whether things are worth stirring up. I'm not a radical leftist that thinks we need to just shake the whole system up and destroy everything. These systems we have built were built by people. So even though you may feel a certain way about it, doesn't mean that you're right, and I understand that. But that really impacted me thinking, If we could all live as conservatives, that means that we were liberal enough to change the laws to where we could be conservatives. And that separates it from what a liberal and a conservative are considered today in politics. But if you lean too far left, you become basically an anarchist. And if you lean too far right, you become a totalitarian. And totalitarianism is basically anarchy in disguise. That doesn't make sense, I know, but when people get so frustrated because they're oppressed, then people lash out. And so even if the people are held back and oppressed, like say in China, they rise up and they fight in the streets still when they need to. And to control a country like the United States under a totalitarian type of leadership would be impossible. I mean, Americans are way too stubborn. All of us are. So people shift on a spectrum between left and right. We've got people on the extreme right who carry firearms just to show they're carrying firearms. We have people on the extreme left who want to be coddled in college and have trigger warnings about what's talked about. It's just ludicrous on both ends. In the middle, we've got normal people just living their lives. Now, going to COVID, because people brought this up, they said, isn't it interesting how COVID, all of a sudden, first everybody was, talking about social distancing. Now there's all these protests and COVID just seems not to be an issue. Well, it's still an issue. It's just that, of course, people are fighting in the streets for whatever their particular reason might be. But we have so much confusion over what's going on that people have just basically given up on trusting their government on anything. So we don't know what to believe anymore. But meanwhile, while we have folks saying, look at these thugs and these, terrorists marching in the streets wanting police reform, then I think back to Charlottesville with these guys with torches who are very fine people, according to the president, and how, white supremacist who shot up a synagogue, and another one who I believe shot up I won't even go into this, but the whole point is that nobody wants to call terrorism what it is when you're terrorizing people. And this is what frustrates people. I'm not here to say, oh, this is wrong or this is right, but rather look at it for what it is and see why people are angry. But the point of bringing that up was that the interesting part of it was watching people march down the street with torches, screaming, Jews will not replace us. I'm still trying to wrap my head around this years later. How many Jews do you think there are? And how are they going to replace you? This brings me to the George Soros being the boogeyman for the current issue. When people say, well, the COVID was planned to keep people passive and to keep people, from questioning their government and staying at home. Okay, so how does that conspiracy pan out now when everybody's mobbing in the streets? That one obviously didn't work, but we always have a boogeyman. Brings me back full circle to the beginning. George Soros, whoever it might be, because he's a billionaire and he's Jewish. I mean, it's the perfect storm for somebody to blame. But there was a guy, I think back in the 90s, 2000s, I think he's still alive. His name's Arthur Finkelstein. And he created a language which was known as Finkelthink. Finkelthink, you can look it up. And Finkelthink was basically, he said you can't, he's the one who made liberal a dirty word. It wasn't that long ago. He said you have to go after a person, not a policy. And I think a lot of people will understand that today. The left media does it with Trump. The right media does it with, everybody else. Everybody's arguing back and forth about specific people and not policies and ideas, because if you attack a person, then it's more difficult for other people to stand up for them and that person to defend themselves. Trump does this really well. He understands this psychology, but that's why he tweets and calls everybody these nicknames and insults people specifically, but also attacks entire groups. But he's not only the one that made liberal a dirty word, but yeah, he said it's like this idea of calling the left violent when people are violent everywhere. It's the same thing as dehumanizing or putting the way that they used to show blacks or Jews in cartoons back in the 40s and 50s, and many people still do today. I mean, we still have, racist outlets like Breitbart who, yes, I do go scan their headlines once in a while and see what other people are saying, and it's pretty transparent how people feel about one another when you start looking at it. And, just it was interesting. Trump talked about sending in the troops to Seattle. I live in Washington State, talking about these terrorists that have taken over, Seattle. And it's funny because the mayor basically says, fuck you. You can stay over there and worry about your own problems. This is state autonomy. That's what we have. Thank you. We don't need your federal input. But it's pretty fascinating to me what people call a riot and how they can drag on riots into 2 weeks of protests, in which the riots happened, a few nights. There's been a little bit of destruction, and everyone's still hung up on that. And meanwhile, people are out there who still really are convincing themselves that George Soros somehow is sending out checks or funding all of these protesters. I'd like to say, as one person who was in the protest, I still haven't received my check. When democracy is in danger, I feel there's an obligation to speak out. And democracy's been in danger for a very long time. I mean, there's a good versus bad mentality out there that all Democrats are evil, Satanists or something, and it's just preposterous. It has to end. It's shameful, and people are ignorant, and they're spreading a lot of bullshit. So, on a final note, a lot of people really believe that every event is planned now. I understand that. And there is a strong psychological reason behind why people do that, because they feel like they've lost control, or they don't have control over life, because life is hard, and you have to deal with issues, and weird things happen. But if you want to put a blame on a person for everything that happens and say, George Soros did this, you really have to be honest with yourself. The belief that all world events are planned and that everything is by human design is what it does is it not only strips you of your power, but it also, I've realized this, it allows people to not have the obligation anymore to try to vote or help others or improve their communities or environments. In other words, it gives you a free ticket to say, well, this is all planned, it's all going to fall apart anyway. And this often goes back to religious beliefs about the end times, that the end times are here. This is consistent through history. I mean, there's always people who believe that the end times are here. Every century, every decade, it's always the same thing. And it becomes much worse during times of chaos or stress or upheaval, which is what we're in right now worldwide, which is why you can see these protests are obviously not just about George Floyd. These protests are worldwide because everybody's frustrated. We've all been locked down for a long time, and humans are fragile, a lot more than we give ourselves credit for. People are finding themselves more frustrated, a little bit more easily irritated, and then they start lashing out at their neighbors. And, if you think that it's chaos now, if we keep up this kind of bullshit, there's real chaos coming. And a lot of people have given up hope with even having conversations with people about things. But you know what? If you give up, then there's no reason to even be an American. There's no reason to support your country if you really think that half of your nation is evil or a bad people because they're Democrats, or And as I've said before, I'm not a Democrat, but I constantly get accused of things, your side or your guy Joe Biden. I'm like, do you understand the concept of being an independent? Biden's done some good things in the past, and he's done some stupid things. I don't think he's mentally competent. I don't think he's the best candidate. A lot of people say, oh, your guy Bernie. I'm like, you know what? I kind of cringe at a lot of Bernie's ideas, too. There are no perfect candidates. We can't idolize politicians. They got to where they are by making tough decisions, but a lot of them just want to be seen. They want to be noticed. They want to pass their own laws. And this is the case with the current president, who really cares nothing more than being remembered. I mean, yeah, sure, he wants to fix America, but that's only for his own gain, unfortunately. There's no humility there, and there's no empathy left on either side. It seems that everybody's just fighting in the streets about dumb shit, and still obsessed about celebrity culture. If you ever want to see how protests can go, look at Greece. even for an anniversary of a shooting, they have Molotov cocktails everywhere, the black bloc over there, which is what we would call Antifa here, and the cops just stand back and let it happen because it just makes things worse when you oppress your people and don't let them express themselves. And now Americans feel like they can't even just sit in the streets peacefully without being accused of being rioters and looters. So where do you think that's going to lead us all? You know? We really need some understanding, but I don't know if that's going to happen. We'll see. Talk to y'all later. Have a wonderful day, and I'm sure I'll get attacked by being called something. Somebody left a comment earlier saying, he's like, now you've made it clear that you're obviously on the left. I'm like, facepalm, dude, really? You can't see that? I wear tie-dyes, I've got long hair, talk about smoking weed. What do you think, I'm a fucking hardcore right-winger? But it doesn't mean that I'm one of these people that can't handle myself or doesn't know how to protect myself. I'm just smart enough to know better than to talk about firearms or self-defense. I don't stand and pose with guns or brag about how tough I am because it just makes you people look stupid. It makes you look weak. That's my opinion on it anyway. Each person is unique, but we have to be able to call out the bullshit, or else future generations of idiots will continue to raise more and more idiots who think that, running around shooting your gun out of your car is cool, or, and then you see the people who are totally respectful with their firearms who cringe at those people because they make them look bad. Well, let me just say, from a liberal standpoint, the people who are throwing rocks and looting small businesses, they make people like us look bad. We're not all criminals. We're not all haters. We're not idiots. And I'm not going to say you're idiots, whether you're on the right or the left. Being an independent sucks because I do lean left, but I have my own opinions on things. And I do tend to lean left, obviously, because I have empathy, a lot of empathy, and care about people. So thank you anyway for listening, and I want to say thanks to my patrons. Thanks to my, if you want extra info, I post my blogs and voice recordings on Patreon when I get a chance, and I'll talk to y'all next time. Be well out there.